Now that the full media entourage has arrived, been called today's Monday, December 3 meeting of the Park and Recreation Committee of the City of Wausau to order. Welcome, everyone. And do we have any public comment tonight? And we're not going to stick to requiring that it be on the agenda tonight. If you have something you'd like us to know, and if you perhaps have something else to do with part of your afternoon, feel free to speak up. Anybody would like to make a public comment? Ms. Miller?
Yes, I shall. All right, I shall begin. Here.
You have the usual 3 minutes.
Thank you. Judith Miller, 903 Kickbush Street, Wausau. I came to speak to the issue of contamination in Riverside Park. The evidence is in the limited testing of the soil that has been done there has revealed contamination in excess of the soil safety standards established by the Wisconsin DNR. With that in mind, while the council and perhaps other committee members have discussed doing further testing in Riverside Park, no action has been taken. As a representative here of Citizens for a Clean Wausau, I ask you, and the citizens of Clean Wausau ask you, to please recommend to the City Council that a public review process to determine the extent and nature of further testing that needs to be conducted be initiated, and further, that the council proceed with further testing as speedily as possible. As I say, the evidence is in and the facts demand this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. We can go to approval of minutes for our November 5 meeting, and we did go on and on there, didn't we, gentlemen? Anybody want to approve that? Motion by Neal, second by Smith to approve the minutes as presented. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Passes. Thank you very much. And we have a new item here, discussion and possible action to advertise request for proposals to conduct a feasibility study for a baseball complex. And Ms. Powley can bring us up to speed on this, I think.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an item that typically wouldn't come to the Parks Committee at this stage, but it's a pretty big project that has been talked about for quite some time. There's also a number of other projects happening in the county that kind of go along with this, with Weston's softball study and then a sports complex study, or the big sports arena study. So this is not in addition to those or anything like that. It's something completely different, but it does maybe hinge upon what comes out of those studies down the road. But over the years, the Baseball Association and Newman High School have talked with city staff and city officials about the possibility of a baseball complex somewhere in the city. One of the ideas is Brockmeyer Park. It's something that has been brought back up again just to look at and to see. One of the things that our staff has decided to do, because we're getting a lot of proposals from a lot of different groups to do enhancements to both city and county facilities, is that we needed a proposal in writing. So what we've asked all of these groups to do is provide our staff with a proposal of what the project is that they're looking for, what's the timeline, what's their need, how much they think the project is going to cost, what they're asking of the city or the county, of our department, what funding, how much are they going to pay, what are they asking of the city or county to pay. So we gave that same outline to the Baseball Association. As I was working with them last week and they were putting together their proposal, this is a little bit bigger than a proposal to add a shelter at a park or something like that. This is a bigger concept. In looking at Brockmeyer Park, we know that there are other uses for that park. There's the soccer fields that are there. There's the idea of JoJo's Jungle going there, which is still moving forward. There's parking. There's a restroom facility there. There's a playground. We also know that there may be some construction issues with the bedrock that's there. We found it with some fencing. So as we were working with the Baseball Association, they were trying to put together numbers. It's really hard to put together a total cost of something like this when we really don't know what the feasibility of it is in the first place. So after talking with the group, I suggested that the first step is to go out to see what a feasibility study would cost to lay out the site per scale to know how many ball fields would actually fit there. Do some soil samples from the site to see what the feasibility is of actually building the ball fields there and putting in lights, putting in fencing, and then also putting together a cost estimate. A consultant would be able to tell us exactly how much this would cost per linear feet of the fencing, for the infields, for the soils, and then we would also either have the consultant or on our end work with all of the different groups, because if this were to become baseball complex, we need to find another place for soccer to go. Soccer uses these fields. And we look at the whole city and county system in general. So the first step that I think that we need to look at, and at this point there is no request for any funding, but it would be to put out a request for proposal to ask a consultant to do what I just mentioned, to lay out the fields, do a soil analysis, and to do a cost estimate. First, we need to know what that cost would be from consultants. Like I said, typically this stage wouldn't come to the Parks Committee, but because this is a bigger project and because of the other projects going on in the county, I felt that it was at least better to bring it up to the committee so that you have an idea of what is being looked at. But what we would do is put out a request for proposals for a contractor to say it will cost us X amount of money to do that scope of work. Then I would sit down with the Baseball Association and Newman High School, and we would look at what is that study going to cost, and they would decide if there's any money that they could provide to get that study completed and what they may be asking of the city to contribute to get that study completed. We would bring that back to the committee at that time before a study is commenced. So very preliminary stages, just to kind of get an idea of what would someone charge to help us put this initial plan together. We would do that, and then, like I said, come back to you. So we do have members of the baseball group here today if you have any specific questions. Without getting into the real details of the plan, I think that's something we'd get into after the proposal or the feasibility study is completed. But that is kind of what we're asking, just to keep it transparent and in front of the community. This is a possibility.
Mr. Neal?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On a couple of occasions, years ago, our family found ourselves, is it in Plover where they have the large baseball facility?
That's one.
Down there, went down there for tournaments and stuff when our son was, whacking the ball around. So, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, that's a pretty, significantly sized facility by my memory anyways. And when you think of, the footprint of the fields abutting each other, and how many fields there might be, and then the related facilities where, dugouts or, restrooms, or I don't know if there's locker areas or whatever, and parking and all of that. Do we, even at this point, have a feel for, the size of that facility, and is that anywhere near, or are we anywhere near being able to accommodate something like that? And if not, then what is our kind of end game, pun intended, for the facility? Because, they bring in, big tournaments and stuff down there, so. Thoughts?
Yeah.
Hi, my name is John Halstead. I've been with Wausau Youth Baseball and Softball for about 7-8 years now. Like Jamie said, we've been talking about this potential project for 2 to 3 years. There's really no good location in Wausau that I can identify except Brockmeyer Park. I'm thinking on the grand side of things, 5 diamonds. A typical Little League diamond is about 200 feet in length. You can make them circular. Brockmeyer's one diamond is about 300-foot base fence line. And I do have a little kind of a mock picture of a 3-diamond complex. And I can let you guys pass that around. I only brought one. So.
I've got a copy too, John.
The idea of this complex, it would not interfere with the JoJo's Jungle project, as far as I'm aware. So that would just be another project on the list.
Mr. Neal, to answer their question too, I think that that's part of what that feasibility would tell us, is if they could lay out these 5 fields, and with the parking we have there and with the space that is available, they would do a guesstimate or an estimate based on their experience and with other tournaments, how many spaces we may need and whether or not that site could accommodate it. Because you can't park on Statine Drive there, so that doesn't allow us to help with the parking, but I think that's something that we would want them to look at as well.
Any other questions from the committee? Mr. Knight? Go ahead. Dennis?
Is this going to be somewhat similar to what they have out at Sunnyvale? Is that what we're looking at doing?
At this point, yes. And the question comes up, why don't we just use Sunnyvale? Sunnyvale's right now not a baseball complex, and it's a good softball complex. There's a lot of refurbishment that needs to take place already at Sunnyvale. If you can play softball out there, but for instance, the lights out there, if you want to play a night game of baseball, you just can't. The posts are not high enough. You'll lose the ball, and if it goes up in the air. The distances are perfect, and you can, if you want to shorten the fields up, there's a lot of reasons you can use it, and we've had a tournament out there. It's just not the ideal baseball complex, and it's hard to give you that picture without boring you with a lot of baseball details. I don't know if you've been out to Sunnyvale and a number of times. I don't know. It could be done. I'm not going to say Sunnyvale's not an option, but Wausa's out there. I mean, they're using it. They want their time. They have a contract with the Parks Department for the concession stand, so that's another issue. The whole idea of having a complex is to generate revenue for our youth nonprofit and to just perpetually feed itself every year, to fund itself, and also to maintain itself through the concessions and having tournaments and games out there. Monday through Thursday would be our City League games, and then weekends would be tournaments. And it's not limited to just baseball. I mean, if you design the fields correctly, you can easily use them for softball tournaments as well. So it's not just baseball.
Well, it sounds like a noble effort, but my concern is, listening to the parks director here, is there enough room? If we do this complex, do we displace the soccer? There's also a playground out there. There's another playground that's being considered now in the process of being funded. And so is there any way to expand that park now? Could we acquire more land out there?
I don't know if we could acquire more land. I think that's part of what with study. We'd want to really see how it could lay out and if it could work. With that said, I think you mentioned Sunnyvale, and the Village of Weston is doing a study right now too on a possible softball complex. So with all that in mind, we want to make sure that we're kind of all in the same time frame, because Sunnyvale is going to be part of that softball complex plan or study, because the question has to be answered. If they build their softball complex, can we really afford to keep Sunnyvale as a softball complex? Do we need those 2 softball complexes in the county? Maybe the answer is yes. I don't know, but that's where we would have to work with Wausau, who uses our complex, to see if Village of Weston's going to build theirs. Our tournaments most likely are going to go to a brand new, nice facility versus an older facility. So that means Sunnyvale may need to be repurposed. And if that's the case, then Sunnyvale would be a great spot maybe to redo those softball fields into baseball fields and then not build this. But if Weston doesn't build theirs, we still need that softball aspect for tournaments, and we do need to do some upgrades to Sunnyvale as well. But then we would need, this baseball, if we can show that it can lay out and we can show the need for it, then we would need that alternative to where a baseball complex would go. But we're going to look at the bigger picture. It's not just Wausau or the county. It's kind of everything in the whole area and how do we work together versus compete against each other, because we're just not that big enough a region.
One point I want to just remember in all of this is the high schools and the elementaries, we use all their diamonds mostly for softball, but for our little 4-year-olds to 6-year-olds, we use 4 diamonds that the elementary schools want to remove, and so we would be losing those diamonds, and we would need to find other diamonds that would work. So we're trying to get away from the high schools and just the Wausau school system because of their efforts and they also have their own softball programs starting up, that we're losing the ability to access those diamonds because of their sports events are taking over. So we're in a need, and we're being shifted and pushed away from what we have already. So that's part of our push for the need. Yeah.
So we're looking into the future. So you're going to draw up some sort of a proposal for what you would want to have studied, and then you're going to run it past the department staff.
Yes.
Very good. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thanks.
Interest is great. Item 5 on our agenda is discussion and possible action on the dog park the subcommittee, tasks and goals. And Alderman Neal, since he was involved in the Wausau group earlier, has also stepped up as the chairman of this group, and I guess if we can give him any guidance as to what we would like to see happen, now is the time.
Mr. Chair, can I quick
Yes.
go back to item 4? I didn't hear any objections. Is it okay to go out for the request for proposal? I just wanted to get a head nod from the committee to start that process. Okay.
I would entertain a motion to that effect. Mr.
I would
Gisselman?
move to go ahead with the request for proposals.
Okay.
Very good. To work with the baseball and softball group.
Yes.
Very good. Second on that? Mr. Smith? All those in favor? You have a question, David?
Yes, sir. My comment was to be certain that we weren't going to impinge upon the desires of JoJo's Jungle to take place as has been planned for many years. And fundraising is still ongoing, but we've even broke ground there for that. So to assure that that group has their footprint in place. I didn't see that on this rendering here, but also to be certain that the placement of that park there is not also going to be
Conflict with other users?
conflicted with this different option. Now, it looks like this is youth, and of course, the park is youth. I'm very concerned that this is cared for in its planning.
I'm sure they'll consider that, and it sounds like it could be complimentary if families come to a baseball game. Maybe the younger kids could go over and play at JoJo's Jungle while, big brother, big sister play, swing a bat.
That's true, yeah. It's also a concern is that we're taking this area, but it can only be used for this item for a very short period of time throughout the entire year. I'm certain, is there multi-uses that can be utilized in this area? That's, Mr. Duncanson has been looking at baseball diamonds not being used well in our park system, and that diamond there historically has been slated for what can we reuse this for. It's geography that's not got a lot of use. At least that's been historic. I may be wrong on that, but
Do you mind if I say something?
if you could, sure.
There was a period of time in the Parks Department recently where fields were not being cared for like they should have, to nobody's fault. And we've had some people within the parks and people within Wausau Youth Baseball and Softball who've really driven hard to find money, use our own money within our league. We've done some renovations just in 2018 where we've improved several fields. Now Brockmeyer is one field that we have avoided using because it does need to be rehabbed. If you keep the diamond there, the big diamond there, it needs to be rehabbed. I know Parks Department has done a good job of aiding that, but there's more that needs to be done. So my point is there's going to be, if you're going to keep the diamond there, there's money that has to be spent to fix it up, to get it usable. This would be part of it. And that's why some of the fields we've kind of avoided. And it's good to have one field that we're not using so that we can rotate as the fields need to be refurbed, which is every 8 years. They should be refurbished with new grass and whatnot to keep them safe. You rotate those fields and not use them that year, that summer. And that's just the way I've experienced it in the 8 years, is to have that one field that's not being used every year. It's just part of it, to keep it healthy. So that's my input.
Thank you. All those in favor of directing staff to cooperate on this and report back, say aye.
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 All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Okay, we're back to the dog park. Ms. Powley has given this some thought and can maybe kick us off, and we're going to have a meeting at 5:15 if all goes well.
Yes, thank you. I think you mentioned it very well going into the meeting tonight, just with some guidance of the committee, what we want to see them work on. A couple of the things that have been brought up is, we have the 2-acre site that's been looked at. That's what was brought forward with the CIP process. I think one of the questions was, is that the site that we want to use, and is that the site we want to move forward with? What are some other ideas? There's a lot of different. I brought 2 magazines along that we can kind of talk with the group about today. Our National Park and Rec magazine is all about dog parks this month. So a lot of different pros and cons of different ones. And it all depends on what the committee itself, I think, wants. The one that was just built in Rim Mountain is around 4 acres and has some wet area in the middle, so it's fenced off. The 2-acre site that we have is really just upland grass. But what features? Is it just a trail that people want? Is it agility courses? And I don't know what the vision coming into this towards the end, or when it was already going to the council for a CIP, what's the vision of the committee to have this group start working towards, is I think what we'd like to discuss.
Yeah, I'm sure that we'll find in the subcommittee's meeting that I anticipate some differences of opinion along those lines. So we're going to have to work our way through that to get to a firm vision, consensus of what is doable, maybe even versus what is ideally wanted, and that sort of thing. So we have to be pragmatic and look at our options and start working towards a doable goal. So I hope for a good meeting.
Any other citizen committee comments on that? I would say that part of me, when we started this subcommittee thing, wanted to say, okay, get your group together, go get the money, build what we want, to get it done now, and have it be over. But I believe that Ms. Powley is correct that we need to allow the subcommittee to go back and look at the site, possible other sites, the design, everything, and to make sure that we were heading the right direction. And the subcommittees can decide on its own, and we'll have autonomy in what it develops. So, and they also will have the cooperation of the Park Department staff for anything they need, and I would encourage them to do a thorough job, and they've got a number of months to do it. So looking forward to this process. Switching, I guess we can go into educational items. Department update.
Yes, thank you. I was asked to give an update on our assistant director position. It's currently open for applicants. It's open until December 21st. As of today, we had 23 applicants, so I'm assuming we'll probably get a number of them right before the 21st to fill out the application. We will then be assessing the applications and probably doing interviews after the first of the year with a successful candidate, hopefully starting by March 1st or before, depending upon how fast we can do the interviews and how much notice they have to give. So that's our plan for that. I don't really have any other department ones. Should I go into the project?
Sure.
And the project updates are just every month we give the committee project updates on kind of where we're at. At the last couple meetings, we talked about the 400 block and some reservations. This is kind of coincides with that, but the 400 block has been a different facility compared to all the other parks and all the other shelters. So we recently had a meeting with the city clerk's office that we would like the reservations to start, or they would like the reservations to start with our office, because if it's a basic rental that's like a picnic, family picnic, or something we have on our typical parks, we would start with that. Then there's a checklist of what would trigger the special events guide and have it go through the appropriate committees based on what it is. So we're working on that transition for that one. Sylvan Tubing Hill, we started snowmaking operations this weekend. The snow helped us a little bit, except for it was really wet. But they'll be working around the clock for the next 2 weeks to have a goal of opening at mid-December, at least one of the hills. The ice rinks, the warming houses have been moved to the different ice rink locations of 400 Block, Tom Field, and Marathon Park. As Greg mentioned in here, we're hoping for adequate snowfall to start packing the areas, and the colder temperatures that will help freeze that ice and make that ice. So we got a little bit of the snow, and now we need the colder temperatures, a little warm out still, but they'll be working on those. They're also working on some pier abutments at Schofield Park with some new pier installations in the spring. And then update on River Life was asked about the concession building and what's happening there. As if you've been down to the area, you'll see that it's fully enclosed with plastic. The building is. That is so that Myron can keep the building project going. Their completion date for the building is December 23rd. They are still on task to do that. They have to have that plastic up because they need to side it with this EFIS stucco siding, and that has to be at a certain temperature, so that's why it's heated on the outside. That is going up next week. So they still are on schedule to do that. Once they have the building complete, they will move the fence in from the road. They'll get rid of their job trailer, move the fence in, and then the road will be open and maintained by Public Works and snow events. Right now, we are keeping the trail section open as it snows, but the road will be open around Christmas time. The rest of the park, we have substantial completion for June 1st. So as soon as the snow thaws, they'll be scheduling the pour-in-place surfacing, and the landscaping is the biggest items that need to go in the spring. And then we just continue to work on routine operations as time allows.
I have a question. First, I'll get to you, Mr. G. I understood from the Director of Public Works that when the street opens up past there, that they're going to have a bunch of stuff stacked on the River Edge Trail, and that's going to be closed. Are you going to try to keep that open?
No, the River Edge Trail will be closed this winter. We'll be rerouting people along the side of the road from the trails that will be open and maintained. The River Edge Trail part of it, it's not paved in there. There's gravel. The pavement on part of the trail is missing. And there's some utilities that were just put in there from WPS. Also, there would have been additional cost for Myron to move the fencing in around the playground area. Right now, it goes right down to the riverfront. So if we wanted the trail open, they would have had to fully enclose that side because it still is an active job site. So the safest thing right now was the conclusion of keeping that trail segment closed for the winter. However, we will have the trails open to the road, along the road, and back to the other trail, so people can still get around there.
Okay, and then on Sylvan Hill, does somebody actually need to be there while those snow guns are working? They need to be moved regularly, or,
Correct, yep.
okay, so somebody, when you say work around the clock, somebody is there.
Yes, we change our shifts to accommodate that.
Okay. Mr. Gisselman?
Just to follow up with regard to the trail, then the trail, when do we anticipate that the trail will be open? I mean, it seems like next year sometime, next summer.
Yep, we plan to open the trail at the substantial completion date of June 1st, because right now it's an active job site, so if anyone enters that fence, they need a hard hat.
No, I understand.
So,
I was just sort
yep.
of looking for some kind of a date of when
Yep.
we anticipate this. So then that also with the building and also with the road.
Yes, the building and the road are, the building is separate. The building will be completed this winter. And then in the spring, because of the temperatures, the poured-in-place surfacing for the playground will be done. The rest of the pavement will be done, which will finish the trail, and then the landscaping will go in. Those are all that we have left in the spring to do. And that substantial completion date for Myron is June 1st. If they go beyond that, then we have some items in the contract that will help the city in that regard.
Mr. Nutting?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regards to Sylvan Hill, I would like to encourage our Parks Director to take a run down the hill prior to opening to the public to see if you, as a potential customer, are satisfied.
Okay.
Because I've been unsatisfied with my last two visits, only getting halfway down the hill and then having to get up and walk a considerable distance. So I would encourage the staff to assure that the general public can get to the bottom of the hill where they can disembark and hand their tube off to the next recipient, because this business of getting halfway down and then the hill doesn't slide well.
Yep.
Either grease it or freeze it. Let us get down, because I remember getting
freezing
down
is
to the
Mother
very end. In fact, even going up over the embankment and going down the other end at one time, which was fun too.
Yep.
So let's assure that we can get to the bottom of the hill with whatever means. Thank you.
Yeah, we will try. Mother Nature plays a big part in that. If it's warm and the snow is sticky and melts, it doesn't go fast, no matter how hard we try. But
Well,
hopefully
over
we
on
have
the
a
sledding
colder-
hill, over on Pleasant View Park, it doesn't require anything. Mother Nature's snow, we get right to the bottom. Now, I don't know what it is. The artificial snow isn't working. Maybe
we'll look at it.
figure out how to get us to the bottom of the hill, because it works pleasantly fine at Pleasant View Park.
Okay.
I think the grease idea break new ground in sledding hill operations. Anything more on the her report or the summary? Thank you. Looking at future agenda items, anything we'd like to take on, Mr. Neal?
Sure. I think in light of, recent comments from the public about concerns about possible ground contamination at the park by the river, that we address that at our next meeting.
Very good. Alderman Gisselman and I, as the chair of SISM, have been talking with us about this a little bit. One of the things we wanted to do was wait until we had the reaction back from the toxicologists whose report was criticized recently. So I can work with him and we'll figure something out. But I think has value. Anything else? Mr. G?
Just curious as to how you want to present this as far as some type of actionable item to the city council, or, I think it's fine for us to talk about it here, but I think we have to have some ways of making sure that the citizens are heard and that there's some action comes forth. I'm not sure at this point in time, maybe this committee will decide that at the next meeting, but I think that I again echo Mr. Neal's request for some kind of, I think, almost a major discussion really with regard to how we're going to be proceeding listening to the citizens and seeing where we go with the contamination on Riverside Park?
Yes, I think that would be our intention, is not to just have a discussion hour here, but to have something that we would propose for a response. I did contact the hydrologist from the Department of Natural Resources, and I said if we did want to go ahead and do further testing, would you advise us on what to test for, where to test for it, and how many tests to take and stuff like that. And not too surprisingly, he declined to leap into that role, but he did make a good suggestion. He said what you're asking is to have the Department of Natural Resources serve as an environmental consultant, and that's not our role. And so he suggested that if we did want the services of an environmental consultant to advise us, have some kind of a independent source of advice on this, that there are people that he could recommend. So that's a possibility that we can discuss. Anything else on that? Any other potential agenda items? Hang on. We're going to close that part up, and
Pardon me, Mr. Peckham, may I speak on the agenda item of future agenda items, please?
yes, you can, as soon as we're done figuring out that I think we're wrapping up our, well, if you would like to speak on this, step up, we're loose.
Thank you. Hope it's not an interruption. I know historically you've allowed comments on agenda items when they come up. So on the item of future agenda items, thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Neal, about more testing, and I certainly support that as well. I know all members of our group do too. I'd like that noted for the record. But one thing was about waiting until the toxicologist from the state respond. I mean, I see no issue with that as long as it's timely, but I think something should be noted for the record, and it hasn't been stated explicitly to this committee that there are in fact multiple samples that those are included in the ones the toxicologist looked at, multiple samples in multiple areas of the neighborhood that exceed Wisconsin state default residential soil standards for dioxins and furans. Let me say that again. Some of these samples actually exceed residential state standards. Now, that's why the toxicologist probably mentioned from the state, that is, that despite their qualitative subjective opinion, there would be regulatory issues, and that's because these actually exceed the state standards. Now, unless they're exercising an arbitrary exemption or discretionary power, which they sometimes do and I believe are allowed to do, state law and state spill law is very clear about how this should be handled. So unless the city applied for an exemption in that park before they took ownership of that property, then let's look at what the law actually states. And I don't always want, I hope it doesn't seem that I'm always underscoring some of the risks and negatives, but a member of the council had asked me, in fact, multiple had, how can we move forward with this? Right? And that's a good question. That's the core question. It's a logical one. So what I did is I looked at some communities, again, that have dealt with a very similar circumstance, and one of them is the Stephen Foster neighborhood in Gainesville, Florida. And I printed out a few, time constraint. I just wanted to give these to the committee.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I just want to make sure, and Mr. Killian too, that the purview of our committee is the park itself. And, too often our discussion kind of extends to the surrounding neighborhood. We're talking about a square mile of property in the city, which is a different, really probably another different committee's concern and a different subject entirely. There could be connectivity, but our purview really is the park. And that's where, that's where our limit is in terms of what we, will discuss and will recommend going forward, because questions about the neighborhood are beyond us, really, and rightfully so, so.
That is one of the decisions that we need to make before we go forward. If you could wrap it up, Tom, we'd be in
Yes,
good shape.
of course. And so what that letter shows from the county chair down there is that they asked that state law be followed in Florida. That was to delineate the extent of the contamination and then to respect and observe state law on residential dioxin levels. So what I am saying is there's no need to reinvent the wheel. The lawful, reasonable decision here is to respect state law, which we kind of have in black and white. And lastly, to Mr. Neal's point, I agree with the context here, and you're kind of the driver, because the best case scenario is the levels of additional testing would be within state levels, but if they're not, then we would need to look at the northern part of the neighborhood, since there was no physical barrier historically. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So the decision becomes no less complicated as to, exactly which committee we should start in, who's responsible for what, and all that stuff. But I would hope that we would be able to show the community that we are responding and concerned. Anything else for the agenda for next time? Hearing nothing? Any other public comment this evening before we wrap up? Seeing nobody jumping to their feet, I would thank everybody who participated in any way this successful session tonight, and would entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Neal and Mr. Gisselman are providing those motions. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, as an epilogue, do you think that our dog park subcommittee should meet here rather than the Birch Room?